Okay, this video is going to be mitochondrial inhibitors, and this is the newsletter for November 2023. I just mailed out the newsletter, so if you have subscribed to it, you should be receiving it in your email. You can just check your if you want to receive the newsletter, just send me an email at the address below. PeterRogersMD@protonmail.com. And I'll send you a copy of it. It's just a newsletter, nothing else. I manually send them out, each one individually. So basically, what's the point of this? There's over 50 mitochondrial inhibitors. And your mitochondria are the energy powerhouse. They're like the electrical power plant of the individual cell. And there's over 50 things that inhibit them that are known, and many of these are quite common. So basically, there's a lot of things knocking down your ability to produce energy in your cells. And when it gets too low, the cell will just die. Dramatic reduction in energy production by mitochondria causes cells to die, like your brain cells to die. So you don't want that. And so that's why it's worthwhile to learn about these things so you can avoid some of these chemicals. If you have severe mitochondrial dysfunction, the cell dies. If you have moderate mitochondrial dysfunction, the cell just underperforms. It functions poorly. You get accelerated aging. And you see this in a lot of conditions, things like with diabetes, dementia. Okay, the cell membrane ion gradients across the plasma membrane are maintained with ion pumps. I just gave a previous lecture. It's good to watch that one before you watch this one, where I talk about how the ion pumps keep that plasma membrane about negative 65 millivolts, and they also use about 65% of the energy in the cell. It goes to those pumps. So that's easy to remember. It's almost like 2/3, 66%, but 65% of the ATP is used for the plasma membrane gradient, and it uses that ATP to make a gradient of negative 65 millivolts. Okay. Okay, now here's the slide, and when we'll look at this slide here, let me get myself into the corner here. You got about a 15,000 times higher concentration of calcium outside the cell compared to inside the cell. And because of that, you're always going to need ATP to run these pumps to get calcium outside the cell because it's so highly concentrated outside the cell. There's also going to be an organelle over here, we'll call it the endoplasmic reticulum, that you're going to pump calcium into to store calcium in the cell, and it's going to be concentrated inside that endoplasmic reticulum as well, such that you have to have ATP to run these pumps. And this pump over here, the knockout exchanger to pump calcium out of the cell, is coupled to the ATP used for the calcium, for the potassium sodium ATP pump over here as well. The bottom line is you need ATP energy to pump calcium out. That's what you have to know that. Okay, so anything that decreases ATP production by inhibiting your mitochondria is going to interfere with your ability to pump calcium out of your cytoplasm. And that means the cell can't control what it's doing, and that's a major problem. Okay. Okay, the most common neurotransmitter that cells are going to pump is going to be glutamate. Glutamate is the neurotransmitter. It's released from one neuron, goes to the next neuron, activates the next neuron. So it's an excitatory neurotransmitter. It increases activity level in the next neuron. And because of that, you don't want increased activity. For example, psychological stress, increased cortisol will cause more glutamate release. Things that mimic psychological stress, like drinking caffeine and coffee. That's why all these people telling you coffee, they don't know what they're talking about. They're full of crap, okay? And then they're going to tell you, oh, we have all these research published articles that coffee is good for you. Yeah, right. Stuff published in the last 20, 30 years, funded by the companies that make coffee and tea and all this other stuff. All right. Why would psychological stress is bad for you? Why would you do something that raises the exact same hormones? Okay, cortisol and catecholamines, adrenaline, noradrenaline. You don't want that. Okay. And then I'm going to get into things like MSG, the flavorant. It's tastes like salt. Just makes things taste good, and that can potentially increase your neuronal cytoplasm, your neuronal calcium, and also your glutamate going across your synapses. It'll have a similar effect. Glyphosate, the thing sprayed on the non-organic crops like the non-organic soy, for example, also is an excitatory. Has an excitotoxin effect, can increase activity in the NMDA receptor for glutamate. Okay, when glutamate is present in large amounts, it's the excitatory neurotransmitter. It'll overactivate the postsynaptic neuron, and if you overactivate it too much, it can't keep up with that, and it'll start to dysfunction. And if you tremendously overactivate it, the neuron will just die. That's called going into apoptosis, programmed cell death to recycle itself. Okay. And these excitotoxins are a really important concept in brain physiology, pathophysiology, causing death and disease. And nobody, and they're not in all the books. You even go in the neurology, Ivy League neurology textbook, 1,700 pages. There'll be like 2 little tiny paragraphs in the context of stroke or seizure. They're a joke, okay? And people don't know this because it's not taught. And very few doctors read scientific papers. They just read the textbooks, pass their boards. The boards are based on the textbooks, not on the scientific literature. A physician does not need to ever go into the scientific literature to pass their boards. It'll be old, established stuff from a textbook. Okay, that's an important point. And that's why they don't know this stuff. If it's not in the conventional textbooks, then they don't get taught it in medical school or in residency, and most of them never read any scientific papers again the whole rest of their career, so they don't know it. So that's kind of the joke. They go to pre-med, they go to med school, they do a residency, and they don't learn what causes disease, and they don't learn how to prevent disease. All they learn is this is the pill that goes for this condition. Okay. I know excitotoxicity, if you get somebody who really cares about the brain, wants to know what's going on, they're going to be fascinated by the dilatory theory, and they're going to be fascinated by excitotoxicity. And the reason I'm giving you this lecture is for you to understand excitotoxicity so you then can avoid the things that are going to make it worse, which means all these mitochondrial inhibitors. Okay, and it's normal to have some excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate. It's important for learning and for memory. Okay, and another thing too, if you go to the college and the medical school biochemistry textbooks, I was like, just about the best biochemistry medical student in the whole United States when I was in medical school. And I can tell you, I went through that book backwards and forwards and through several different copies of the textbooks. Never in my whole career do I remember ever learning anything about mitochondrial inhibitors. And I talked to a whole bunch of other doctors. And as a matter of fact, I was talking to these doctors who are the best researchers in the world in their areas. I'm friends with them, okay? They never heard of mitochondrial inhibitors, okay? It is simply not on the awareness, consciousness, the radar of MDs, MD PhDs. They don't know this stuff, okay? And this is like just about one of the most important things you could know about the brain, okay? So I understood that mitochondrial inhibitors were a big deal. And I had read a lot about what causes dementia, what optimizes cognitive function. And so I started digging through the literature, and I very quickly found over 50 mitochondrial inhibitors, and a lot of them are really common. Okay, so now I'm going to show you this picture, and this is the picture. You might want to hit the print screen button. Let's see if I can get it perfectly centered in your page there. I think that should do it. Okay, and I'll get myself out of the picture here. Okay, so these are mitochondrial inhibitors. These are all things dropping your energy production. So the most common one, we all know about this, is saturated fat. It'll inhibit complex 3. That's the main thing causing insulin resistance, and it causes electron transport to run backwards. So this drawing, by the way, is of the mitochondria. This is the inner mitochondrial membrane. These are the complexes, complex 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can call this complex 5. It's really ATP synthase. These complexes hand off electrons, and they pass them down like a fireman bucket brigade. Oxygen over here has the most desire to grab the electron, so it's called the ultimate electron acceptor. And it actually receives 4 electrons at a time, and then some hydrogen protons to be converted into H2O, to water, okay? And as these electrons are passed down this gradient, you can think of it like a snowball rolling downhill, they pump out protons. Protons are pumped from the center of the mitochondrial matrix, into what is called the intermembranous space. So you see a proton being pumped here. H plus is a proton. So it's basically the hydrogen nucleus. That's a proton. It's got 1 proton, and the electron has been separated from it. Okay, so in a sense, you think about it. The mitochondria has split the atom. It has taken the hydrogen atom and split it into a proton and an electron. Okay, and the electrons are passed down the electron transport chain of these complexes, and the proton is pumped into the intermembranous space. There's an outer mitochondrial membrane, so this intermembranous space is a space between the outer mitochondrial membrane and the inner mitochondrial membrane. And then you built up a pressure gradient there. It's like having compressed air. And then at ATP synthase, at the end of the chain here, you're going to let a hydrogen proton come back into the matrix, and that comes in under pressure as if it was compressed air, for example, and that'll spin the ATP synthase. And when it spins the ATP synthase, then that's coupled to adding a phosphate to ADP. Adenosine diphosphate becomes ATP, adenosine triphosphate, okay? And so the extraordinary thing about this is how common all this stuff is. Fat will reverse electron transport. You get insulin resistance. Everything backs up, and you cause a metabolic disaster with insulin resistance, okay? But it's not just fat. Here's F minus. That's in most people's tap water. That inhibits complex 4. So that's going to drop energy production, okay? And then Tetsumori Yamashima, the great Japanese neuroscientist, he wrote all those papers about, why more Japanese are becoming demented these days because they're eating too much of these cooking oils, the omega-6 cooking oils. And then because of lipid peroxidation, you end up making these toxic aldehydes. The most important one to know about is hydroxynonenal, and that will be damaging to mitochondria. It damages ATP synthase, all right? You need this energy in order to run all those ion pumps so you can regulate the cytoplasm calcium so your neurons don't get destroyed. And so they maintain, they continue to function well, okay? So you don't want to eat any cooking oils. They're bad for you. They're a poison, okay? You don't want to eat any F minus. You don't want it in your toothpaste. You don't want it in your mouthwash. You don't want it in your tap water, preferably not in your water at all. The best situation is live in a place where you got well water with no F minus in it, or find a city where you could live where they don't put F minus in the water, okay? Some countries have removed it from their water so they don't have to deal with that. It lowers IQ and it decreases fertility. All right. Okay, there's other things like these estrogenic chemicals. Some of them are also mitochondria inhibitors. Here's BPA, bisphenol A, and it's also toxic to your mitochondria. That's not good, okay? Here's a nonstick cookware, PFOA, that also decreases mitochondrial function, which means it lowers your energy production. Here's another endocrine disrupting chemical or estrogenic chemical, atrazine. We talked about that, sprayed on the non-organic corn, for example, the one that turns the male frog into the female frog. It also blocks your complex 3, your electron transport in your mitochondria. So that's all bad. You want to avoid all that stuff. And I think that's also a weakness of the low-fat vegan communities. A lot of them don't, make any distinction between non-organic and organic food. Now, don't get me wrong. I'd rather eat a plant food that's not organic than eat animal products and oil. But I'm just telling you, if you have a choice, you don't want to eat that non-organic stuff. Okay, you don't want high fructose corn syrup in anything you eat. All right, common medications like Tylenol, or we'll call it acetaminophen. Okay, that's also inhibits complex 3. Not good. You can also say, let's say you have a diabetic and they're having a hard time getting their glucose under control. Well, gee, you don't want any of this stuff inhibiting your mitochondria. First of all, of course, lower your dietary fat, but you should also lower your dietary sodium, get that optimized, more potassium and magnesium. It's a long story, but they will affect your cytoplasm calcium concentration as well. So I'm not going to get into all the details of that. It's a whole big other topic. I've talked about insulin resistance in other lectures and hypertension in other lectures. But I'm making the point here about stacking up the straws on the camel's back until it breaks. You hit a threshold and you start destroying cells and losing cells. And the way you avoid that is you can avoid all this. You can avoid atrazine. You can avoid F minus. You can avoid cooking oils and H&E, hydroxynonenal. Okay. Let's see, what are some of the other things here that are common? We talked about GP, glyphosate, and that's sprayed on the non-organic soy. That's also a mitochondria inhibitor. You want to avoid that stuff. It's also sprayed on other non-organic foods. It's sprayed on non-organic oats. It's sprayed on non-organic beans. So that's why you want to get organic on your beans and your oats, your oatmeal, for example. Okay, and you want to avoid, let's say, like I would only eat plain organic oatmeal because all the non-plain oatmeals, they tend to have sweeteners in there and natural flavors, things like MSG. So then you're going to get the stimulant effect, which is going to be overactivating your neurons. So you're going to require more ATPs to get the calcium concentration in the cytoplasm under control. So those things are all connected. Now here's some things that people don't know. Statins also decrease the function of coenzyme Q. So that's why I kind of laugh. Like the typical fat, stupid person who I talk to, in their 60s, they'll tell me, oh, they're on a statin for their cholesterol. They're taking metformin for their pre-diabetes. And I'm like, great, you're a real genius, okay? And they eat non-organic food. So they're blocking electron transport with statins. They're blocking it with glyphosate. They're blocking it with metformin, okay? Even, the hypertension medicine, furosemide, Lasix, the water pill, diuretic. That's a mitochondria inhibitor as well. Great. Okay, then the other thing that's a big joke in conventional medicine is all these psychiatric medicines. I'll have a reference at the end. When you look it up, you're just going to laugh. Let's see what Escitalopram, SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's a mitochondrial inhibitor. Trazodone, another antidepressant, mitochondrial inhibitor. Prozac is also damaging. Fluoxetine to mitochondrial function. There's more of them too. Sertraline, another sort of famous common selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressant. It lowers mitochondrial function. Bupropion, it's another antidepressant. It also lowers it. Okay, Haldol, the antipsychotics, Haldol, and several other antipsychotics used to treat schizophrenia. They also block mitochondrial function. So that's why I've told you is almost all those psychiatric medicines, if you study them, you'll be amazed. They damage mitochondria, and they're a slow, progressive chemical lobotomy to make people stupid. Okay, psychiatry is kind of a big joke. Okay, and there's like I've had a psychiatrist get mad at me. Don't get me wrong. I know some psychiatrists who I really like. They're real smart and they're very nice. But I'm just telling you, this psychiatric idea, that whole neurotransmitter balance theory is bogus, and the whole idea that they really know what they're doing and their drugs work is a big joke. Almost all the you read like Bregan, okay, almost all these psychiatry meds, they just cause a slow progressive lobotomy and damage neurons. And they kid themselves. They pretend to understand the central nervous system far better than they do. You don't usually just have two neurons interacting. You've got a whole bunch of them all interacting together like a symphony. It's not that simple. Okay, what else? Trichloroethylene. It's like the dry cleaner chemical. That's why you don't want to go to dry cleaner. Okay, I don't care if my shirt has a little bit of a wrinkle in it. All right. I don't ever go to dry cleaner anymore because I don't want to inhale those chemicals. They increase your risk of Parkinson's disease, which is also partially caused by excitotoxins. So what I'm trying to say is the effect of excitotoxins that overstimulate a neuron is very much the same as the effect of mitochondrial inhibitors that drop the ATP energy production, because you're still in the same place. You can't handle your cytoplasm concentration of calcium. You either have too much coming in because of the excitotoxin, or you have decreased ability to pump it out because of the lack of ATP due to an inhibited, damaged mitochondria. And like I said, too, the only way I know you can avoid this stuff is being minimalist, you know. For example, antifungal chemicals, they routinely inhibit the mitochondria. And I can tell you, you know, I had a little conversation with my wife. You know, she was a cosmetologist before she became a doctor, okay? I go in her bathroom, and there's about 55 cosmetic products. Perfumes, moisturizers, wrinkle creams, all this stuff. You go in my bathroom, and there's nothing but a transparent bar of soap that I don't even use that much. That's it. No shampoo. Even when I had a little bit of hair here, no shampoo. You don't need it, okay? I found out I didn't need shampoo, and I have the simplest possible bar of soap. I don't use any personal care products. All of the personal care products, they've got chemicals in them, okay? They've got things that are inhibiting mitochondria, probably. They're in a BPA plastic bottle, for example. I learned something else interesting, too. You think bottled water is so great? This chemical, antimony, that's the chemical symbol for it, SB. It'll leach off polyethylene terephthalate plastic water bottles, okay? And it's a mitochondrial inhibitor, okay? It's also used in flame retardants. That's why, let's say I just have to do suture removal on a patient, a very minor procedure. I don't want to splatter myself while I'm removing the suture, for example, injecting local anesthetic, removing the suture. Okay, you don't need to wear a blue surgical gown. So you have a blue surgical gown, like a surgeon gown, that has flame retardants on it because the expectation is the person might be working with cautery, so they'll have the flame retardant on there, but you don't want that because that can that'll have like the bromines in there, and it'll also have antimony in there. A good chance it has antimony in there. It's a mitochondrial inhibitor. Okay. A lot of these antibiotics, you know, why do they put F- in all these neuropsychiatric drugs? Because it increases traversal of the blood-brain barrier. They also put it in these fluoroquinolones, antibiotics, because it'll increase traversal of the blood-brain barrier to treat a CNS infection, but also the testicles. You've got like a blood barrier to your testicles, to the ovaries, to the eyeballs, so sexually transmitted diseases treated with fluoroquinolones. You're also getting these same anti-mitochondrial effects that you don't want. So it's in all these personal care products, some type of mitochondrial inhibitor as well. They put antifungals in all these, a lot of foods. They put them in personal care products so you don't get mold growing in the food or in the personal care products, so it doesn't get returned to the corporation. Corporation's goal is to make money, not to make you healthy. What else? Multiple food dyes and all the processed food, mitochondrial inhibitors, you know, the arsenic. We've talked about that before and where the whole deal with that. Traumatic brain injury. Silver iron. Somebody was asking me just recently, a viewer, about what do I think of silver, colloidal silver. I think it's stupid. It's a mitochondrial inhibitor. Okay, malate dehydrogenase enzyme is inhibited by that. Almost all the heavy metals are toxic to the mitochondria. Lead is toxic. Hg is toxic. Cadmium is toxic. Okay, a lot of things too. Like the typical stupid person will say, "Oh, I don't want to remember or feel anything from this procedure. Just give me a medicine to knock me out." And I'm thinking I'm the exact opposite. If I go for a procedure, I would want it done with local anesthetic, or you know, and it was just a fine needle aspiration, 25 gauges, maybe even none, or just local anesthetic. Okay, what I'm saying is, look at these medicines. Propofol is a mitochondrial inhibitor. How do you know your memory is going to come back perfect after you sort of trash it, okay? What are some of the other things? PCBs, yeah, fish are so stupid. Fish tends to have high PCBs, high Hg. What else? Chromium. Some people are taking chromium. Now, it's not all chromium, but hexavalent chromium with a 6 plus positive charge. Also toxic to mitochondria. Okay, you see, a lot of these things are common. Titanium dioxide nanoparticles, that's a common ingredient in a lot of medications, sunscreens, and stuff. It's toxic to your mitochondria. See how this is all adding up? I worry, too, about potentially the cyano component that's in cyanocobalamin B12, or cyano that's in almonds, potentially even in flax, potentially in this thing now being sprayed on avocados and apples and other things. I won't eat that stuff, okay? Americans tend to be iron overloaded, the men by their 20s, the women when they're postmenopausal. You don't want that. That's why you want to keep your serum ferritin down. That's why I go and I constantly have extra blood taken off me every time I go for labs, because I want to get my serum ferritin down. Ideally, I want to get it down between 25 and about 75. But I'm currently down to 130, 131, but I'm working on that one. You want to avoid all this other stuff. So I think you get my point. Alcohol also is toxic to your mitochondria. So there's a lot of things people are being exposed to. And once you realize that, some of these you might inevitably get exposed to a little bit of heavy metal contamination in your food that you can't avoid, but you want to minimize it all as much as you can. And this is what I meant by you can keep piling on and tipping over the threshold. Anti-seizure medications tend to be mitochondrial toxic. You know, they're slowing down the brain. So anyways, to me, that's an extraordinary slide right there. That's like, I call it an AO, academic orgasm, because when you realize so many things are nickel and diming, damaging your brain, to me, that's a great motivator to do everything you can to avoid them, okay? And that was kind of a bit of a shock. All these antidepressants, they're all damaging your mitochondria, okay? Look at them. There's a whole bunch of them. Fluoxetine, escitalopram, sertraline, trazodone, bupropion, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones. Those are just the ones that were discussed in the articles that I read. We talked about calcium being the key ion, turns things on and off. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see, all these things that'll increase calcium. Okay. You're getting exposed, you're getting EMF'd all day long from the cell phone, cell towers, Wi-Fi, your laptop computer, which opens up voltage-gated calcium channels. Let me make sure I'm still in the right spot here. Yeah, dietary flavor enhancers. Let's see, what else? We talked about the glyphosate on non-organic food. We talked about the calcium pump to pump it into the endoplasmic reticulum of the neuron, requiring ATP. So you need those mitochondria function, otherwise your calcium just keeps drifting up. Okay, it's called SERCA, sarcoplasm endoplasmic reticulum calcium ATPase, because of the word sarcoplasm comes from it's being part of muscle. That's what they call it in the muscle. They call it sarcoplasm rather than just endoplasmic reticulum. Okay. So in conclusion, neuron regulation of cytoplasmic calcium concentration is essential to proper neuron function. And all the pumps that have to pump it out, they all need ATP. So if your mitochondria are inhibited, you can't make all the ATP you need to make, and that means your neurons are not going to function at their optimal level. And if it really gets out of hand, your neurons are just going to start dying left and right, and you're going to get stupider and stupider. And that is the average fate of the typical American after 55 is cognitively slow. You know, it's sad, but basically You're being exposed to brain toxins in all your food, in your water, in your air, uh, in your electronic environment. I mean, I feel sorry for people. Okay, here's some references. This is the Michael Brownlee paper, the best paper ever written about diabetes, showing how fat inhibits electron transport, especially complex 3. Here's a paper showing about synthetic food dyes inhibits mitochondria. This guy did a lot of the pioneering research on excitotoxicity. Dennis Choi, he's interviewed on some videos. The Mark Madsen podcast has interviews with him, and he's good. He's nice. You know, he'll tell you the basic scoop of excitotoxicity. He's pretty conventional in his mindset, though. He's not going to get into a lot of variety stuff, but he's smart. He's nice. He'll tell you the truth. Here's the PFOA stuff and how that's toxic to mitochondria. Here's how mitochondria is, another paper showing its major role in insulin resistance. Yeah, it's the main point. Here's one about furosemide Lasix, the water pill causing mitochondrial damage and neurodegeneration. Great. Here's one paper showing chromium hexavalent with the 6+. It's a transitional metal, has a variable valence that also is toxic to mitochondria. Antimony leaching from polyethylene terephthalate water bottles. Great. Mitochondrial oxidative stress was the reason for apoptosis by a whole bunch of different heavy metals. This paper was interesting. There's a whole bunch of heavy metals that'll cause damage to the mitochondria. And we just talked about a whole bunch of them. Lead, Hg, cadmium. Okay, let's see, different types. Oh yeah, there's another paper showing how a whole bunch of SSRIs as well as other antidepressants, bupropion and trazodone, they're somewhat similar to the SRIs. They're all toxic to mitochondria. Fluoxetine is Prozac, toxic to mitochondria. Great. Another paper showing how fluoxetine can cause necrosis of cells. Oh, this was funny. It's in an onco-target journal. This is in a cancer chemotherapy journal. So here's what's funny. So some poor bastard, they're not feeling well. They're depressed. They go, oh, some psychiatrist says, take this pill. It's an antidepressant. And meanwhile, the chemotherapy doctor is writing articles saying, this pill kills cells. It kills cells. This is what we need to use to treat cancer. So they're giving the people a drug that kills cells. It's toxic, okay? It's freaking toxic. I've given a whole bunch of lectures on food and mood, and obviously depression's a complex thing. But the point I'm saying is this idea of take some powerful drug that's, that has excitotoxic effects, mitochondrial toxic effects. You think that's going to help your depression to give yourself a slow chemical lobotomy? Yeah, right. Anyways, this was a newsletter for this month. And the whole point of it was to help you realize you want to avoid these mitochondria inhibitors that can help maintain your health. And you want to decrease your brain noise. Like Michael Merzenich said, how do you improve a brain? You train it. If you want to be good at playing piano, you practice every day. And then how do you make a brain worse? You add noise. Well, all these things are adding noise. So you want to avoid the noise. Like, for example, I wear ear protectors when I'm trying to study and concentrate. The house is noisy. I avoid all these things. Caffeine, other stimulants, alcohol, any food with MSG in it. I got my water filtered. Because I want to avoid all those things so my brain cells function well. And, I'm 60 years old. I can concentrate 12 hours in a row and write all these books, make all these videos. I've made over 1,000 videos in just, what has it been, about, I've only been doing this now about 2-3 years, 2.5 years. I don't think it's been that long. So what I'm trying to say is anybody could do this if they just keep themselves healthy, focus on what they're doing, and, hopefully it'll be helping everybody. Hope so.